There are stories that begin not with fame or fortune, but with a single glance across a crowded room. For Bob Clayton, that moment came when he first saw Justine Carrelli on his television screen. He would later admit with a smile that never left him, "I just thought she was so cute. I said to myself, I'm going to go up there, Bert Braber." And so, like a scene from a teenage daydream, Bob walked into the studio of American Bandstand in Philadelphia, a boy from Delaware with blonde hair, sharp features, and the kind of confidence that made him stand out the moment he stepped onto the dance floor. At first, Justine resisted. She already had a boyfriend, and when Bob asked her to dance, she brushed him off. But fate rarely takes no for an answer. That night, Bob partnered with her friend instead, and by the end of the evening, he walked straight up to Justine again and asked, "Are you going to dance with me or what?" With that, the spark ignited. Justine later recalled, "He walked over real cocky, and I thought, oh, really?" But when we danced, it was like I had danced with him forever. That instant chemistry would soon capture not just their hearts, but the hearts of millions watching across America. In an era defined by jukeboxes, soda fountains, and the thrill of first love, Bob Clayton and Justine Carrelli began a story that would become part of television history. From the moment Bob Clayton and Justine Carrelli took the floor together, it was clear they weren't just another pair of teenagers spinning records and showing off the latest steps. There was an ease to the way they moved, a natural rhythm that seemed to rise above the music itself. In 1957, they proved it by winning the Jitterbug Contest on national television. The prize was fitting for the times. Each walked away with a full-size jukebox, an emblem of youth culture in an age when music defined everything. That victory was more than just a contest win. It was a coronation. Viewers adored them. Teenagers mailed in thousands of postcards to vote for their favorite couple, and Bob often found himself showered with cufflinks from fans after casually mentioning on air that he liked them. Justine, too, received boxes of dolls from across the country after telling Dick Clark she collected them. These tokens weren't just gifts. They were proof of the powerful bond between two dancers on a stage in Philadelphia, and millions of kids watching from living rooms in Ohio, Kansas, or California. Their fame was built not on scripted lines or studio magic, but on authenticity. They laughed, they teased, they held each other close during the slow dances, and audiences believed in what they saw. There were other famous couples, Justine would later reflect, but we seem to be the ones most remembered. For Bob, the charm was effortless, the blonde hair, the confident grin, the way he seemed both polished and approachable. For Justine, it was her natural warmth and the sparkle in her eyes when she looked his way. Together, they embodied the dream of every teenager who tuned into Bandstand, to be young, admired, and, just for a moment, unforgettable. And while their names became synonymous with the show itself, they were never alone. Many other dancers were capturing attention in those same years. Which of them do you remember most vividly? If there's a particular bandstand dancer you'd like us to revisit in a future video, let us know in the comments. We'd love to keep bringing these memories back to life. Fame, especially the kind that arrives in one's teenage years, can be both a gift and a temptation. For Bob Clayton, the applause inside the bandstand studio and the fan letters piling up at his doorstep seemed to whisper that more was possible. Dancing had made him a household name, but music, that was the next frontier. When he and Justine were offered the chance to record a song called Drive-In Movie, it felt like a natural extension of their popularity. Teen idols were crossing into the world of records all the time. Why shouldn't America's favorite couple try their hand at the same dream? But the move carried risks. Dick Clark had always been firm about one rule: bandstand dancers could not commercialize their fame while appearing on the show. When word spread that Bob and Justine had made the record, the reaction was swift. Both were quietly asked to step away from the program. In an instant, the dazzling couple who seemed inseparable from the bandstand stage were gone. For their fans, it was a shock. For Bob, it was a turning point. The dream of becoming more than a dancer had cost him the very platform that had given him everything. He didn't give up right away. In 1960, Bob made his way to Hollywood for a screen test, chasing the possibility of an acting career. It was the golden age of television, and many of his peers were doing the same. But Hollywood was a place of unforgiving comparisons, and Bob later admitted with a chuckle, "At 5'8", I looked too small next to all the 6-footers." The opportunity faded as quickly as it came, and soon he found himself back in Delaware, a young man faced with the reality that not every dream was meant to last. Yet even in that disappointment, Bob carried something valuable. He had lived the fantasy of millions of American teens, and he had dared to push beyond it. Walking away from the cameras didn't erase who he was or what he had given to a generation. It only set the stage for a quieter, more grounded life, one where resilience rather than fame would become his defining rhythm. For all the fame that swirled around Bob Clayton and Justine Carrelli, at its heart their story was one of young love, pure, intoxicating, and complicated. To millions of viewers, they weren't just dance partners, they were boyfriend and girlfriend, holding hands on and off the floor, sharing private smiles between songs and whispering to each other when the cameras turned away. The chemistry that made them a household name wasn't an illusion. It was real. But first loves rarely come without storms. Justin remembered the heartbreak years later with the same clarity she once remembered their slow dances. "Bob started to have a roaming eye," she confessed. "I was just heartbroken. I said, 'Hit the road, Jack.'" The pain in her voice revealed how deeply the betrayal cut. For Justine, who had shared her teenage world with Bob, the end of their relationship felt like the loss of more than a partner. It was the loss of the dream they embodied together. Bob, always candid, admitted his share of the blame. "I guess I had sort of a roaming eye," he said, not with pride, but with the humility of hindsight. "We were outgrowing each other." In that simple acknowledgement, he revealed the truth of many teenage romances. They burn brightly, but they rarely last forever. What made theirs different was the stage upon which it played out. Their breakup wasn't confined to whispered arguments or long phone calls. It happened under the watchful gaze of a nation that had believed in their love story. Still, what lingered was not bitterness, but memory. Justine once said, "Your real first love is something you never forget." For her, that was Bob. For him, it was Justine. And for the fans, their romance was a mirror of their own youthful hopes and disappointments, projected onto the flickering black and white screens in living rooms across America. When the lights of American Bandstand faded, Bob Clayton didn't linger in the shadows, chasing a stardom that had slipped away. Instead, he chose something more difficult and in many ways more admirable. He built a new life from the ground up. While some of his fellow dancers went on to careers in entertainment, Bob returned home to Wilmington, Delaware, determined to carve out a future that was steady rather than spectacular. His first steps were modest but essential. He worked in retail, taking jobs at local shops like Storm Shoes and The Little Heel, and later at the grand department store Wanamaker's. The same charm that had won over audiences translated into the sales floor, where customers remembered him as attentive, polite, and approachable. Yet Bob wasn't content to remain an employee. With time, he and a partner opened several shoe stores of their own, eventually owning 4. In those years, the teenager once idolized on television became a small-town businessman, putting in long hours, managing inventory, and learning the rhythms of commerce rather than choreography. But life is never a straight line. After years in retail, Bob transitioned again, this time into the less glamorous but stable world of industrial supplies. At Diamond Chemical and Supply Company, he built a second career, one that had nothing to do with television lights or fan mail, but everything to do with hard work and reliability. He stayed until his retirement in 1998, proud not of headlines, but of consistency. What stands out is not that Bob walked away from fame, but that he did so without regret. He never seemed to chase what might have been. Instead, he embraced what was in front of him, the chance to provide, to build, and to live quietly. In that choice, he revealed a different kind of courage. For some, leaving behind national recognition might have felt like a failure. For Bob Clayton, it was simply another rhythm, not set by music, but by the steady pace of everyday life. In 1985, long after the applause of Bandstand had faded, Bob Clayton found something far more enduring than television fame. He found Elizabeth, known to everyone as Litzy. Their marriage marked the beginning of a new chapter, one built not on the cheers of teenage fans, but on the quiet companionship of adult life. Together, they settled in Delaware, where Bob had spent most of his days and crafted a life that was steady, content, and deeply personal. Friends often remembered seeing Bob and Litzy on their boat, smiling in the sun, carefree and at peace. The confident teenager who once commanded the dance floor was now a husband enjoying simple pleasures, an afternoon on the water, a walk through town, or a gathering with old friends. Their partnership wasn't glamorous, but it was genuine. In Litzy, Bob had found the anchor he needed, someone who could weather storms and share in the calm. Remarkably, Bob and Justine never drifted into bitterness. Decades after their romance ended, they remained connected through friendship. In photos from the 1980s, the Claytons and the Millers, Justine and her husband Jim, stand side by side, smiling as if no time had passed. They were no longer teenage sweethearts, but they were lifelong companions, bound together by memories only they could fully understand. Their bond was a testament to the idea that some relationships, even after love fades, evolve into something just as lasting. Behind it all was Bob's resilience. In 1980, he had quit drinking cold turkey, determined to build a healthier life. Years later, when he suffered a heart attack at 54, he fought through it with the same quiet determination that had defined his choices since leaving the spotlight. These weren't headlines, but they were victories, personal, private, and profound. Through it all, Bob remained the same at his core, charming, approachable, and quietly proud. Whether as Litzy's devoted partner, Justine's lifelong friend, or simply as the neighbor who always greeted you with a smile, Bob Clayton found his place in the world beyond television. And in that simple, steadfast life, he became something rarer than a teen idol. He became a man remembered for who he truly was. By the early 1990s, decades had passed since Bob Clayton and Justine Carrelli had been the shining faces of American Bandstand. Life had carried them in different directions, careers, families, responsibilities. But time has a way of circling back. In 1992, at the 40th reunion of Bandstand, the two stepped onto the dance floor once more. What happened next was pure magic. As the music filled the room, they moved together as if no years had intervened. "We danced," Justine recalled, "and it was like we had never stopped." Bob agreed, marveling at how natural it felt, how their bodies remembered every step. For those who watched, it was as though the clock had turned back, and America's favorite couple had returned for one more waltz through memory. The reunion was not just about Bob and Justine. It was about the family they had built with Dick Clark and the dancers who once shared that stage. Dick himself was more than a host. He was a guiding force. Bob spoke of him with deep admiration. "It's a tragedy. I had made a date to take him to lunch when he turned 90 and I turned 80. He was a workaholic. He just loved it so much." Justine echoed the sentiment. "It's like I lost my big brother. We were family for years. He always treated me special." And then there were the quirky, unforgettable fan moments that defined their youth. Justine once mentioned on air that she collected dolls. Within weeks, boxes of dolls arrived from across the country. When Bob casually admitted he liked cufflinks, the same thing happened. Envelopes filled with cufflinks poured in from strangers who felt like friends. Those tokens, though small, revealed something larger: the extraordinary bond between television's teenage dancers and the millions of viewers who lived vicariously through them. For Bob, the reunion was not about reliving glory, but about honoring connection. It was a reminder that his teenage years on Bandstand were never just his. They belonged to everyone who tuned in, cheered, and sent their hearts through the mail. And as he swayed once more with Justine beneath the reunion lights, it was clear that some dances never truly end. Would you like us to revisit Justine Carrelli's journey in more detail in a future video? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear which dancer's story you'd like to see next. By the time Bob Clayton reached his later years, the boyish blonde idol who once twirled Justine Carrelli across America's television screens had become a man defined not by fame, but by resilience and devotion. He and his wife, Elizabeth, affectionately known as Litzy, made a home in Delaware, the state where Bob had spent nearly all of his life. To friends and neighbors, he was no longer the television star from the 1950s, but simply Bob, friendly, kind, and quietly proud of the life he had built beyond the limelight. In private, he carried both triumphs and trials. In 1980, he gave up drinking cold turkey, a decision that shaped the decades that followed. He endured a heart attack at 54, yet lived on with determination. Litzy was by his side through it all, their bond a testament to enduring love that had nothing to do with television cameras or national fan clubs. Their happiest moments were often the simplest. Afternoons on their boat, dinners with old friends, the laughter of shared stories from a long-ago stage that had once seemed so important. But illness caught up with him quietly. On November 6, 2016, Bob passed away from congestive heart failure at the age of 75. The timing was almost poetic, though bittersweet. It was the very day after the Bandstand Memories book launch, an event where many had hoped to see him, to celebrate the show that had defined his youth, and perhaps to thank him one last time. Few realized how sick he was, and the news of his passing cast a shadow of sorrow over what should have been a joyful reunion of memories. His obituary remembered him not as a failed actor, not as a businessman, but as what he truly was to the public, the smiling young man who captured hearts in the golden years of American Bandstand. For those who grew up watching, Bob's legacy was not measured in records sold or awards won, but in the warmth of afternoons spent glued to a black and white television, believing in the magic of youth, music, and first love. Even today, photos resurface. Bob grinning beside Justine in the late 1950s or standing proudly next to Litzy decades later. In fan groups and nostalgic gatherings, his name still sparks conversation. Remember Bob Clayton? Remember how he and Justine seemed made for each other? And always, the answers come with smiles. Perhaps the real question is not what happened to Bob Clayton, but how we choose to remember him. And maybe the answer is simple. In every song, every memory, and every dance that still lives within us. As long as the music of that era plays on, Bob's presence will never truly fade.